Welcome to the On List. Typically, I try to avoid nostalgic, wistful, longing videos when we talk about vintage fragrances, things that have come and gone that we wish were still around. A lot of channels do that. You know, you got the guys out there who praise be, worship the vintages and the oak moss and stuff and say things will never be as good as they once were. So there's no reason to smell new perfume. Just live in the past, stick your head in the sand, crawl under a rock, right? It's so depressing. I absolutely hate that. But there is something to be said about styles, not individual fragrances, not laser focused on discontinued, highly sought after fragrances. We're looking at the style they inhabited. So that's the theme of this video. We're talking about discontinued styles. We're talking about extinct eras of fragrance where an entire blip or subgenre of fragrances emerged and then all but a few examples disappeared. And what's funny is when you have something like that happen, you tend to think that the most popular ones are the ones that stay. But you'd be wrong. See, as it turns out, some brands, especially brands that are much bigger and deal in much higher numbers, they are more concerned about profit and profit growth to an extent that a fragrance that just does good isn't good enough. It has to be doing better than every other fragrance on the market and better than it did the previous year, and just has to be constantly doing better. Once it stops doing better, it's gone. It's not allowed to plateau. You know, it's not. So, on the other hand, smaller, more obscure brands that don't care if they don't push 500 billion bottles a year, they're happy if they push just 1 million, right? That's still a lot. They'll keep it around. They'll reformulate it, whatever. And then those end up being the ones that stick around. Where the big name brand ones become the unicorns that all the Dubros or Fragrantica obsess over. But the obscure ones that were not so popular, a lot of times they're still made. And you can still buy them. And they end up being the last man standing in their particular species, if you will, of fragrance. So, to give you an example of that, a discontinued style, an extinct style, of which the only standing member of it that's not a clone. So we have a lot of brands that are recreating these old fragrances, like Dua, Paris Corner, are making clones of discontinued fragrances. But I'm not talking about those. Those don't count in this exercise. Okay, we're talking fragrances that never left production, that were from the era. Okay, that stand as the only surviving testament of a gone style, of a discontinued style. So, and this is one of those. You guys are going to say, oh, it's more British stuff. He's been on this British kick. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of did my video on that like 2 weeks ago. But this is still a recently new addition to my collection, so I'm still going to be talking about it for a little while. Bear with me. But this is not one of the more classic florist fragrances. This is a more recent one. 2001 is not super recent, but for a brand this old, for a brand that's 300 years old, yeah, this is kind of recent. So, and the thing is, everybody in the online fragrance community, especially, you know, the adult daycare moron romper room that is Fragrantica, they're like, oh, it smells like Gucci Envy. Oh, yeah, it's a Gucci Envy. No, it does not smell like Gucci Envy, okay? What it does smell like, though, is that what they call light oriental style that was very popular at the end of the 90s into the early 2000s. And Gucci Envy was a part of that style. So that is where you can draw the line and go, okay. And in that style, we had other fragrances, a sort of tangent off of Le Male, if you will. The original Le Male from 95, Francis Kurkdjian fragrance, where he made basically a fougere that had some oriental elements mixed in and some mint and some sweetness. It's very cutting edge for like 95. But it was a jump off point, and other fragrances jumped off of Lamal, and you ended up with stuff like By Dolce & Gabbana Man with the zebra stripes on the bottle. You ended up with stuff like Carven Homme. You ended up with stuff like Aura Men Giacomo. You ended up with stuff like Very Valentino Pour Homme in that blocky bottle. And then Mousse de Cartier Pour Homme. And then very late in that style, like mid-2000s, we had Antidote. The first Victor and Rolf fragrance called Antidote was kind of the last man out to get the light. The last example of that style. Real latecomer. So the thing is, every single fragrance I just mentioned is discontinued. Antidote is gone. Mousse Pour Homme is gone. Very Valentino is gone. Carven Homme is gone. By Dolce & Gabbana Man is gone. Gucci Envy is gone. Aura Giacomo is gone, but nobody wants it, so you can still buy it for cheap, but it's gone too. It's unloved. It's discontinued but unloved. But it's technically also gone. However, this one still remains. You can still buy brand new bottles of this from florists or from a discounter. And this one is closer to a Very Valentino, which is a Harry Fremont fragrance. This is closer to a Mousse Pour Homme. Okay? So, if you've smelled Mousse Pour Homme or Very Valentino and you miss those fragrances, this is going to be closer to that than Gucci Envy. So, Gucci Envy is very similar to Dolce & Gabbana. Much greener. Carven Homme was also much greener. And the greenest of them was the Aura, actually, by Giacomo. Probably why it was not so popular. Maybe a little too green for its own good. I think it's got a quirky bottle, though. I can show it to you. I own it. I have a bottle of it, but for this nature of this discussion, the florist Santal gets the focus because it's the only one that's still currently made. You can still buy. But yeah, here's this. But yeah, this is much more resinous and sour. It has incense and has patchouli in it, and big pine notes and stuff. Very green. So. But yeah, that style has ceased to exist. So there you go. Another one. Moving right along. A very prevalent style that kind of died out was in the mid to late 80s. This is for you Gen X and Boomer guys out there who were young in the 80s. I was a little baby in the 80s. I was a kid. I was born in 81, so I wasn't wearing cologne in the 80s. I was smelling my parents' cologne in the 80s. So, but in the 80s, kind of on the back of Koros, because Koros was very popular, a lot of other perfume brands tried to launch their own similar, like, soapy meets animalic musky kind of fragrance that combined soapy florals, heavy patchouli, animalic musk, usually using Cinnarome animalis base or something along those lines. And they tried to come out as a sort of Me Too. The same way that when Drakkar Noir came out in 82, it had a bunch of copycats. You know, it had Zerius, it had Duc de Vervis, it had Taxi by Coffin Lux, it had Le Monty Pour Homme, it had Lane Delon Plus, it had Pancaldi, Caesar's Man, Cologne. All these Me Too fragrances came out in the wake of Drakkar Noir. Well, Koros also had its Me Too fragrances. But for some reason, they went a little more in that patchouli direction. Koros was never really fully about patchouli. It is about patchouli, but most people who know Koros will tell you it's much more about the honey, much more about the benzoin, much more about the musk, the white florals. So it's more of a kind of musky locker room meets bar soap kind of smell. But still, there was a blip in the mid to late 80s where a lot of fragrances came out and they followed this musky, patchouli, floral template. And just like with the previous example with the Florist Santal, almost all those fragrances died. Except for one. Except for one. And the one that survived, not the biggest name, actually. Again, not the most popular. Florist is not the biggest name, not the most popular. The Gucci died, the By Man died, all the Carbon stuff, all this died. So this little mid to late 80s blip, these musky patchouli kind of fragrances. Here's the one that survived. I'm pretty sure you guys in the online fragrance community know what this is. But the average Joe is not super keen on this. But it is none other than the 1987 Lapidus Pour-Homme. And to me, this was kind of like taking Koros and dialing back the soap and dialing up the florals a little more and making it rounder and a bit sweeter. And when this fragrance hit in 87, it also helped kick off more of a clubber kind of aesthetic. So like 90s and 2000s clubber fragrances, things like, obviously, like Lamal I already mentioned. Later on, things like 1 Million. Okay, all these real heavy, sweet clubbing fragrances, they all kind of owe their existence to this. This is kind of where it started. Because that genre didn't really exist. People didn't think they needed a club-specific fragrance. A clubber. They just wore whatever they wanted. People wore fougères and sandalwood fragrances to the club. In the 70s, people wore stuff like Paco Rabanne to the club. They didn't care if it was a shaver, wet shaver smell. They wore it to the club. They wore Pierre Cardin to the club. They didn't care. So it wasn't really a clubber fragrance thing before this guy hit the market. And the combination of the carnation, the lavender, the honey, the patchouli, the animalic musks in the base, it just was a kind of continuation of what Koros was doing, but it was cutting out the soapiness that Koros has and just going more into the florals, more into the redolence, less of the bracing aspect that Koros has. And then when this came out, everyone else jumped on the bandwagon too. And a lot bigger, more prestigious brands actually did. And they're all gone. None of them made it. But like, for an example of that, okay, that late 80s period, you had Balenciaga trying to do things with this flanker to the original Ho Hong. This is also like a kissing cousin to the Lapidus. This is much more patchouli though, and not as much of the other stuff. And it's got a more carnation too. But it's another one that's in that same vein. Gone. Can't buy it. Long discontinued. Another one by a more obscure house though, but this Aubusson Futuros, although this one's not really as musky as the others. This one's got more of a clean profile to it, but it does have a leather note, but also gone. Can't buy it. Discontinued. And even though Antonio Puig was never really popular in the United States. In Europe, this was a very big brand. So this should have been a big seller, but we've got Cybaris, another one. This one kind of straddles the line between oriental, though, because it has sandalwood and petitgreen and a lot of what you would consider oriental notes mixed in. But it is also a big musky, heavy on patchouli, heavy on those kind of dandy floral notes. This one, Lord Molyneux, same thing. Dandy florals, civet, okay, patchouli, sandalwood. This one's a bit more in the Chypre vein, not really fougere. But you see my point, though. I am naming a ton of fragrances that all inhabit a very particular style that's not around anymore. They're all gone. They all went the way of the dodo. But for some reason, the Lapidus remains, and you can still buy it. It still exists. Still exists. I can keep going, you know. I have more fragrances in this vein that I could plug to prove my point. But finding them and digging them out is also the problem with a large collection. So rather than waste more time in the video, I'll just circle back and say, yeah, I've proved my point. I could keep going, but I won't. That Lapidus, though, that tiny little Ted Lapidus, not the most popular designer brand in the world. In fact, what's funny is the Balenciaga I just showed you was made by the same parent company as that Lapidus fragrance was. The Bogart Group owned them both back then. Bogart Group doesn't own Balenciaga anymore. It's Kering now, but for a time, they owned both those houses. So really, they were competing against themselves. They were competing against themselves with those fragrances. With the left hand fighting the right hand. But hey, it's how it went down. Now, more recent styles that have gone away, kind of a bit shocked actually, is that mid to late 2000s period where we had these very ozonic, fruity, fresh fragrances that were adjacent to aquatics, but they weren't aquatic. I'm sure you remember the style if you were someone who either graduated high school at the beginning of the 2000s or was in high school into the 2000s when all the young guys are wearing the popular fragrances. And this was a style that none of us could have predicted would have gone away, because we were like, this stuff is everywhere. Everyone was wearing this. And now it's all gone. You know, like Joker with the pencil. It's gone. It's basically what happened. They all just went poof in a big cloud of smoke, I guess. But you know, some of the usual suspects that have released and been discontinued, I can talk about those, but the one that's still made and you can still buy, and you still actually find it in Macy's too, you can still find it for sale at counters, is this one. It's Euphoria Man, or Man rather, by Calvin Klein. This came out in 2006, and it was kind of at the end of that style, actually. This was right around when that style was starting to go away, because aquatics were coming back and kicking butt. But this is not really the most popular example of this style. There were much bigger fragrances in this vein that are now gone, that sold more bottles, advertised more, that were just more successful, and they got discontinued. This one somehow stuck around. But fruity, fresh, light patchouli, ozonic top notes, usually like ambroxan or something, transparent musks in the base. So you get this fruity, fresh, sharp, almost like sour candy smell, like a Jolly Rancher kind of smell, now and later kind of smell, or Starburst, that kind of a smell. And very popular for a while. A lot of guys were wearing that. And Calvin Klein actually double dipped because they did an earlier fragrance in that same style, like this one. This one didn't survive, but this one did. Maybe the packaging was a turnoff. It's ridiculous plastic bottle, but same kind of ozonic, fresh, tart kind of style that everyone loved back then. Gone now. You don't see it. The one that really, really surprises me, though, surprises me a lot, is this. Because when this came out, first of all, this house was huge. At Kenneth Cole, New York Men, the original one. This was a huge fragrance when it came out. Huge. Absolutely huge. And it came in this quirky plastic bottle. A lot of fragrances then came in plastic bottles. Gucci was doing it with Rush. Calvin Klein did it with that Crave. Here, these guys did it with this bottle. So, it's kind of a thing to have plastic bottles back then. And that one just kind of like really just reminds me of what you would get if you took like an Acqua di Gio and made it fruitier. Removed the aquatic elements a little bit and added in more fruit. But yeah, that was discontinued. The Crave is discontinued. There's a lot of fragrances in that prevailing style that all went away around that same time period. So another one that was not so popular that got discontinued would be this, which, like, I can understand, not the most popular in the line either, but again, you see the name and you're like, how did that fail? But like this one here, Polo Black, 2005. When all the Polo fragrances transitioned to new bottles, this one didn't. This one got left behind, so I'm guessing it's gone. Surviving bottles are still available online, but Calvin Klein's not pushing this fragrance anymore, so my guess is it's history. But this was like a big melon and mango and just a big old fruit salad. This fragrance is a big old fruit salad. And it's gone. You can't buy it. You can get it on eBay still, because it's floating around. It's not crazy expensive either, because nobody really wants it. But yeah, it's just that ozonic style just didn't really seem to last. And I've got a certain love affair for those. I mean, I've got a bit of a nostalgia for them because I grew up wearing that stuff. But yeah, it just didn't make it. Did not make it. Oh yeah, gotta put this one back. But another fragrance style that was kind of like everywhere. And honestly, also kind of went extinct. But for some reason, this is still around. Is this one right here. 1881 Pour Homme by Nino Cerruti. Came out in 1990. This one's still being made. I mean, I don't know who's buying this stuff, but there was a period of time when there were a lot of like citric white floral fragrances for men being put on the market. And, well, same kind of deal as with those musky fragrances from back then, is a lot of them came out, a lot of them went away, but this one just carries on. And you figure bigger names would be the ones carrying on, like Givenchy Incense, which came out towards the end of it in 93, but Rochas Globe, in the same wheelhouse as this, also didn't make it. Here's my bottle of Globe, but also didn't make it. I like Globe better, honestly, than 1881. But that whole white, fresh white floral kind of thing, I don't own a bottle of incense, so I can't really show that to you, but obviously you know that's discontinued. That one goes for a big amount of money too. And more obscure entries like Cycle by Otto Kern. This one came out around the same time as well, 1990. Didn't last. But hey, you know, same sort of thing. The one you don't expect to linger is the one that stays on the market. And then another one is the sort of like, I don't know what kind of genre you want to call it, but like sort of floral tobacco vibe style. It's really popular in the mid to late 80s into the early 90s. Same thing. They all got discontinued, but one remains. And it's not the most popular one. But when that style first emerged, it was actually really because of Roger and Goulet. The first one in that style was this in 85. This came out. And it's got kind of that sort of floral tobacco, bit of rum kind of nuance to it. A lot of clove as well. Open is more smoky than some of the later examples. The later examples kind of toned down on the vetiver, toned down on the clove. But this really kind of set a precedent. And then it was followed by a lot of fragrances, actually. A lot of fragrances followed this one. So, most notably, Aramis Havana. Probably among the most popular of the bunch. The one that gets the most talk and the most people seem to really gravitate towards, the one that sold the best. But no. Open discontinued. This got discontinued. A lot of fragrances in this vein. And there were several. There were many. But the one that remained is this obscure one right here. The weirdest bottle from the least known brand, Claude Montana. This came out in 1989. This is called Montana Parfum D'Homme. And this came out kind of, in terms of floral quantity, it kind of sits in between the Havana. In between the Havana and the Open. It's more floral than the Open, but not as sparkly, not as effervescent as the Havana. And this weird sort of like ziggurat kind of bottle. Now, I can't say that the modern versions of this smell very good, because I haven't really smelled them. Some folks tell me that they're not that great, but the fact that this one is still available, you can still buy bottles of this one, but you can't buy the Havana, and you can't buy the Open, and you can't buy all the others. It's kind of weird. It's like the style, like I said, kind of went extinct. And the one left standing is the one that the least amount of people talk about and the least amount of people really care for. And that's, again, circling back to the beginning of this video, just kind of makes me wonder sometimes, was it all that popular to begin with? Because that's the real question. How popular was it if the most popular ones didn't survive? Now, there are definitely some genres that went completely extinct. And the only reason why we have any representation at all is due to historical recreations, okay? One very notable example of that would be the Jockey Club fragrance by Caswell Massey. If it wasn't for Caswell Massey, nobody would know what a Jockey Club fragrance even is. But there was a point in time in the mid to late 1800s, before the fougere became a thing, okay, and before the chypre became a thing, when men wanted to smell good, they would wear a Jockey Club fragrance, which was a term coined by jockey clubs in both the United States and in primarily the UK, English-speaking countries. But among English speakers, it was popular for well-to-do gentlemen, well-heeled people, people of money and taste, to go to these gentlemen's clubs where they would shower and smoke cigars and play sports or lift weights. You know, think of like a posh Gold's Gym with a smoking lounge, I guess. And they also had horseback riding and all different kinds of things. Just like rich gentlemen's clubs. And they were called jockey clubs because they rode horses. And there was a certain kind of floral, musky fragrances that would be worn by them and used by them in these clubs. And there were many at one point. Every major chemist, every major perfumer, every shading supplier had their own take on that jockey club phenomenon. But they all one by one disappeared. And the only reason why we have this one is, as I've said, the obscure, tiny, New York-based brand that sold locally for decades before they became available online was the only way you could get it. And as history dictates, it became the favorite fragrance of people like John F. Kennedy and whoever else through the ages. But at one point in time, the Jockey Club fragrance was as common as a modern-day aquatic. You know, it's what men wore, like with bay rums back then as well. Bay rums were very popular. So, yeah, man, it's just strange to see sometimes how that works. So there you guys go. It's my video on discontinued styles, extinct styles. There are a couple others I wanted to talk about that, I wanted to keep it a little more recent. I didn't want to go too far back. So, hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and I'll catch you later.